Hey, once again, everybody. So I'm finally back with episodes 7 through 9 from Junji Ito Maniac, Japanese Tales of the Macabre. And these three were all actually really enjoyable except for one. But we'll get to that in due time. First of all, to start off with episode 7 called Toontown. This was, I'm pretty sure, the first full-length episode story since Hanging Balloon. And having another entire episode dedicated to the story in this case, I think was a very smart move because this story is just amazing. It's awesome. You've got a great horror concept that is carefully balanced and nurtured from one end of the story to the other. And it's perfectly weighed against a human drama and dilemma that comes in to create even more tension at the same time. A pair of siblings hit someone with their car en route to go visit someone. They end up throwing the girl's body in their trunk on their way to the town where they're visiting their friend, where it turns out everyone there dies and gets formed into a tombstone or a gravestone, if you like, on the spot. They literally transform and grow into a granite pillar right on the spot, and they're stuck there. So you get this really haunting element to this story where anyone who is in the last moments of their life, rather than being treated with grace and dignity, people have to hustle them out of the hospital or the hospice or wherever it is they are and plant them in a safe spot so they won't permanently grow into a tombstone right then and there. We also learned as the story moves on that you can only move the body about before it's died and not after, because then the soul won't be resting in peace, which means rather than turning into a granite tombstone, it grows into a granite monster. So the whole time you're waiting for this abomination that's in the back of their trunk to sprout up and cause a lot of mayhem, which is already suspenseful enough. But then on top of that, you get the brilliant twist when it's revealed that this particular corpse is also the sister of the friend that these two siblings were going to visit. This probably has the most fully formed and human characters of any story in the anthology so far, I would say. And here it feels like the storytellers are really relating and conveying a sense of empathy with the characters' various emotions and fears and frustrations and challenges. And that's not a nuance that you necessarily get with all these stories. And this is another one that, in my opinion, has the potential to be expanded into a feature-length story. And it also manages to be very physically gruesome and gross and visceral without resorting to gore or violence, at least not in the traditional sense. My only nitpick is that visually there were one or two moments where the animation did unfortunately feel a little bit shoddy. It was cast in shadow, and probably deliberately so you can't quite see how cheap it looks. I'm not sure if it was intentional or not, but it just comes across looking almost unfinished. And at least in this one scene, it's very hard to see what is happening. But other than that, I would say that episode 7, Toontown, is pretty much perfect, and I can recommend it even if you don't watch any other episodes in this anthology. It's everything I love about Junji Ito once again. Surreal, twisted, visually innovative, and no mercy for any characters whatsoever. It does at least have empathy for them in this case, which makes it more interesting, but that said, they're still not getting out of this one. Moving on to episode 8, this is another split story. In this one, we have Layers of Terror and The Thing That Drifted Ashore. Layers of Terror I really liked a lot. It sort of carries on some of the themes from the previous episode of the consequences of disrupting the dead or becoming too fixated on the past. And it even looks a little bit at the damage that favoritism in families can do sometimes. A mother and her two daughters, one of whom is clearly the favorite, are involved in a nasty car accident wherein it's discovered that both of her daughters, rather than having internal organs and all the other various layers and components that we all have beneath the skin, rather has formed layers much like a tree. Or in this case, a tree crossed with one of those Russian dolls. Because at least the way the mother sees it, everything seems to point to her daughter being intact in her pure infant form at the center of all those layers. So she starts quite literally peeling back all the layers on her daughter to try and gratify her own nostalgia in this very sort of shameless and grotesque manner. At least until she actually gets down to the center, wherein she both does and doesn't get what she wants at the same time. And then the story concludes on a very gruesome form of, shall we say, poetic justice. I'm not sure if this story finds quite the right way to end. I mean, there was nothing I disliked about the ending, but there wasn't really anything about the ending that gave me a punch either. But, I mean, beyond that, the only other criticism I have of this particular story is that it was too short. I would have loved to have seen this one at a full 24 minutes as well. And then for the second part of this episode, we have The Thing That Drifted Ashore. And I say the second part and not the second half quite deliberately because The Thing That Drifted Ashore only takes up maybe 5 minutes of screen time tops. It's not awful, but it is pretty forgettable just because there really isn't much to it. I mean, the title pretty much says it all. A big fish drifts ashore and gets beached, and eventually scientists and a crowd show up, and they discover human parasites rolling around inside the fish's belly. Really, it's less a story and more of just an isolated scene. I mean, there is the slightest hint and seed of an interesting idea here, but the way that it's been executed and edited into everything, it just feels like filler. And then moving along, we have episode 9, Tomi Photo. This is another full episode story, and it's also another very strong and interesting story for the most part. Well, the way it ends does make it feel a bit inconclusive and sort of episodic. But of course, there is sometimes that sort of David Lynchian aspect to Junji Ito's storytelling, in the sense that sometimes what you see is what you get, whether it all adds up or not. But if you're the kind of person who is open to mysterious viewing experiences, I think that you'll still find this episode very entertaining. It involves a high school girl who's taking pictures of the boys at school and selling them to her female classmates, until a transfer student named Tomi shows up and takes serious exception to what she's doing. Although not for the righteous reasons that you might think. Watching this episode reminded me of the viewing experience of a film like Parasite, or maybe more recently Barbarian. Every time you feel like you're getting settled into the kind of story that it's shaping up to be, it manages to throw a curveball at you. And sometimes those curveballs come tonally, because at one point there's a fairly gruesome transformation that occurs, only to be followed up by a scene of slapstick black comedy that isn't necessarily the most witty thing I've ever seen, but was so unexpected and so refreshing amongst the episodes so far that it still got a laugh and a chuckle out of me. I almost wish they'd done more with the two characters that were involved in that scene, because they were quite funny. And at the story's conclusion, the scariest and most haunting part, at least for me, is that even after all the trouble that the main character has gotten herself into over these pictures, and we're talking like gruesome, surreal, next level cosmic horror trouble here, okay? Even after all that, her biggest regret is that she has no photos left to sell, which is a nice nuance to add because it keeps the character Tomi from being a simple villain. But really, my only criticism of this one is that it feels unfinished, like it was a story that Junji Ito didn't quite internalize or never quite brought to full fruition. Which probably makes it another one that wouldn't be bad to expand to a full-length film, because with a little bit more expansion on the story and the characters, and something to make it all just a little more cohesive, this story could be fantastic. Like, it has potential to be a full-out classic. Unfortunately, in its final form here, it just comes off like a proof of concept. A very entertaining one, mind you, but a proof of concept nonetheless. So that's all I've got for this round. All nitpicks aside, I'm still really impressed with how consistent the quality is throughout all these episodes. Sometimes images that are surreal and seem genuinely alien or foreign or weird, that can get under your skin and stick with you and really resonate in ways that spurting blood and rolling heads and piles of amputated limbs sometimes don't. And with that, I think I'm just going to move right on to the last 3 episodes. Thanks again for watching, everyone, and look for more content real soon. Have a great day.